Hi, friend. Thanks for taking the time to join me this afternoon. You know, it's another beautiful day outside. What is your favorite subject in the Bible to study? To maybe dig a little deeper? Is it in Genesis with the beginning of time? Or Noah and the ark? Maybe it's with Abraham. We could talk about so much, all the way through to the end of time. What the Bible talks about, what's going to happen when we leave this earth. But I believe one of the most fascinating subjects that we can study, that we can talk about, is found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that is the sayings from the cross. When Jesus had been crucified, he suspended between heaven and earth. Fascinating study. And I'd like for us to look at one of the sayings that we find from the cross that Jesus spoke. And that is a word of intercession. When he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. From Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Forgiveness. Jesus was willing to forgive those who were his enemies. Forgiveness is important. But yet, were they forgiven when he said those words? When they repented of their sins, they were forgiven. He didn't hold it against them, because they persecuted him and put him on a cross. That was the purpose of Jesus coming to earth, to go to the cross, to die for you and for me. The Bible says to love your enemies, and that's a hard thing to do, is it not? Wow. But it's not impossible. Maybe difficult, but it's not impossible. There was a native priest in India that had approached a gospel preacher. Joe Gilmore gives the illustration that the priest wanted to find out what the preacher was teaching his people in his country. And so the preacher sat down and began to talk to this priest and was telling him about this lesson that we can learn about Jesus, about how that Jesus left heaven to come to this earth. He suffered in shame and went to the cross, and he died for the sins of mankind. And while on the cross, before he drew his last breath, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. At which point, the priest interrupted the preacher and said, Don't preach that. Get out of here. Leave now. And the preacher said, Why? Because the people will begin to follow you, and they will begin to believe what you say. Isn't that the purpose? Isn't that what it's about? To try to encourage people to come into the knowledge of the truth, to love God, to obey him, to submit in simple obedience and become a New Testament Christian? I believe it's what it's about. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Some perhaps knew what they were doing. Jesus loved them, even though that they perhaps might have done it in ignorance, but he was still willing to forgive them. Do you want forgiveness from God? My friend, we must be willing to forgive those who hurt us, who trespass against us. I've said the wrong thing at the right time. I've said the wrong thing at the wrong time. I've inserted my mouth and I've opened my mouth. It's kind of difficult, isn't it? I've opened my mouth and inserted my foot all the way up to the hip bone. Need to seek forgiveness, because that's what it's about. You know, what about Stephen? When they were stoning him, he lifted up his eyes into heaven and he said, "Lay not this sin to their charge," Acts chapter 7. Forgiveness. If we don't seek forgiveness, if we're not willing to forgive, our life is going to turn sour. It's going to be bitter, and we're going to be sore. In that time you're willing to forgive, you want God to forgive you, you must try to forgive those that have ought against you. Friends, I appreciate you listening. Thanks for taking the time. I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. My name is Tom O'Neill. Thanks for listening.